In this video, we're going to confront a truth most men are too afraid to say out loud: that marriage, in today's world, often breaks more spirits than it builds. This isn't about hate, it's about waking up. If you've ever felt like you were born for something greater, like the world is trying to tame the fire inside you, this message is for you. It's time to reclaim your freedom, your purpose, your edge. You weren't made to kneel, you were made to rise, and rise you will. There comes a moment in the life of every man, silent, profound, where he looks at himself not through the eyes of society, not through the mirror of his lover, not through the approval of his parents, but through the raw lens of existence itself. In that moment, stripped of titles and roles, he sees the truth. He was not born to be an ornament in someone else's world. He was born to create his own. But in today's age, this fire, the masculine instinct to build, to transcend, to rebel, is being softened. Not violently, not forcefully, but gently, with vows, with soft beds, with paperwork wrapped in roses. Modern marriage does not declare war on the man. It invites him to surrender, willingly. The tragedy is not that men marry. The tragedy is that they marry before they become themselves. They sign their names on contracts before they've signed their names on destiny. They dedicate their souls before they've met their souls. And in doing so, they take the wild horse of their potential and train it to carry groceries, to nod politely, to become tame. In the philosophy of old, particularly the one that danced through the blood of thinkers like Nietzsche, the highest aim of man was not to be loved, it was to become something beyond the ordinary, something untamed, something terrifying to mediocrity. Marriage, at one time, was a sacred ritual, a merger of two individuals, already whole, already standing tall. But in our modern era, it has become a pre-packaged role, something entered into, not out of fullness, but out of fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of failure, fear of being judged. And fear, Nietzsche reminds us, is the father of every false virtue. The man who marries before he finds his purpose is a man who builds a house on sand. His spirit may whisper of ambition, of exploration, of solitude and greatness, but he muffles it beneath routines. The children come, the mortgage follows. The man wakes one morning and realizes he hasn't been himself in a decade. He has become a function, a provider, a yes man to the invisible expectations of others. And worst of all, he calls this maturity. But Nietzsche would scoff at this illusion. He would say, the man who sacrifices his soul for security has not grown, he has simply aged. Growth is not the loss of fire, it is the sharpening of it. It is the shaping of chaos into form, not the extinguishing of chaos itself. The problem is not marriage as a concept. The problem is the modern timing of marriage. Young men, still uncertain of who they are pushed by culture, by guilt, by religion, into permanent unions before they've wrestled with their own demons, before they've stared into the abyss of their own existence, before they've learned to be alone without being lonely. And so instead of becoming men, they become husbands. Instead of carving meaning from the silence of solitude, they drown it in constant companionship. They believe themselves brave for taking on responsibility, but often responsibility is just a sophisticated way to avoid the terrifying task of standing alone. Nietzsche believed in the Übermensch, the higher man, not in the sense of dominance over others, but in mastery over self. This mastery is not compatible with premature domestication. It requires the man to confront suffering, to endure solitude, to reject comfort when it threatens growth. But marriage, as it's commonly practiced today, offers a shortcut to meaning, a shortcut that leads not upward, but in circles. How can a man lead a life of philosophy, of inner expansion, if every free moment is consumed by petty logistics? How can he build an empire if his energy is diluted by trivial compromise? And most importantly, how can he remain dangerous to the mediocre world if he has made a pact with comfort? Modern marriage suppresses individuality by demanding constant merging. The man loses not only his time but his edge. He becomes agreeable, predictable, friendly, useful. He becomes, in the Nietzschean sense, tamed by the herd. His radical thoughts are silenced. His wild urges are pathologized. His purpose is no longer the becoming of his highest self, it is the maintenance of his social image. This, Nietzsche would argue, is a quiet kind of death, not the kind that buries the body, but the kind that buries the will to power, the will to rise, the will to question, the will to suffer, alone, if that suffering leads to transcendence. And this is why the first task of the thinking man, the feeling man, the man who suspects there is more to life than routine and applause, is to reject the timing. not necessarily the idea of love, but the premature caging of the spirit. He must delay marriage until he has married himself, until his soul has made vows to something higher than comfort. Only then can he choose, not out of fear, not out of loneliness, not out of impulse, but out of conscious power. Only then can he stand beside another, not as a half, but as a whole, not as a dependent, but as a creator. And if in the end he chooses solitude over union, it will not be out of bitterness, but out of reverence for the sacred flame that no one else was ever meant to hold. For the man who burns with vision, who aches with unfulfilled greatness, who hears the call of the unknown, marriage must not be his starting point. It may be a chapter, but it cannot be his opening line. Let him walk first into himself, let him bleed, struggle, conquer and rise, and only then, may he consider whether any bond on earth is worthy of the fire he now carries. The greatest illusions are not painted on canvases or whispered in churches, they are lived in the everyday rituals of society. Among these illusions, one of the most dangerous is the belief that dependence is love and that obedience is virtue. It is a slow poison, delivered not with fangs but with flowers. A man, born with the seeds of strength in his soul, is taught from the beginning that his worth lies in how well he plays a part, not in how well he discovers who he truly is. From childhood, he is rewarded not for honesty, but for politeness, not for courage, but for compliance, not for solitude, but for popularity. This subtle conditioning continues into adulthood, until he is no longer a man, but a shadow of public expectation. And in this theater of pretense, marriage becomes the ultimate stage, a place where the final mask is fastened with a ring, and the audience claps while the man disappears. Nietzsche did not despise love, but he warned of how society twists it. He saw clearly what most do not, that when society praises something too loudly, it often means it serves the herd, not the individual. And today society praises marriage, not because it liberates the soul, but because it disciplines it. It rewards the man who tames himself, who bends, who becomes manageable. It punishes the man who chooses solitude, who dares to think differently, who refuses to bow before what everyone else worships. This is the essence of slave morality, the morality of the weak, of those who cannot rise on their own, and therefore invent values that make dependence look like virtue. The man who supports himself, who questions traditions, who prefers truth over tradition, is seen not as enlightened, but as arrogant, and so the system creates a new ideal, the agreeable man, the loyal husband, the harmless provider. In truth, these are not virtues, they are merely qualities that make a man easy to control. Dependence is dressed up in the language of intimacy. A man is told that to prove his love, he must give up parts of himself. Time, freedom, space. He must answer to someone else's needs, constantly. He must report where he is, why he's thinking what he's thinking, and when he'll return to the comfort of routine. If he resists, he is called selfish. If he conforms, he is praised. And yet, who decided that this is love? Who decided that obedience is a measure of loyalty? Is not the highest form of love one that allows two individuals to remain free, to choose one another from a place of wholeness, not obligation? Love that demands constant merging, constant explaining, constant compromise. Is it love, or is it merely fear wearing perfume? Nietzsche believed that love, like any force, must be evaluated not by its beauty, but by its effect. What does it do to you? Does it sharpen your spirit, or dull it? Does it make you stronger, or more docile? Does it challenge you to rise, or tempt you to settle? In the modern world, love has become a doctrine, a religion unto itself, where to question its sacred rituals is to be labeled cold, bitter, or broken. But the philosopher does not flinch at sacred cows. He slices them open and examines their entrails. And what we find upon inspection is that much of what we call love is merely the fear of being alone. It is not born from abundance but from emptiness. The man who marries not out of strength but out of pressure, not out of sovereignty but out of need, will find himself chained not just to another but to a version of himself he never chose. He will wake one day and realize he no longer speaks his own thoughts. He speaks the words that keep the peace. He no longer dreams wildly, he dreams safely. And his fire, once meant to light up the world, now warms a living room where no one asks him who he is anymore. Society disguises this as success, a house, a wife, a child, but Nietzsche would ask, what did it cost you? And more importantly, was it yours to begin with, or was it assigned to you by a system that fears men who think for themselves? This is the quiet punishment of those who dare to seek truth. They are made to feel guilty for standing alone. The herd wants unity, sameness, predictability. The man who walks away from the herd is called dangerous, and rightly so. He threatens the illusion. He makes others question their own reflection. He refuses to participate in the silent agreement that says, let us all pretend this is enough. True virtue, Nietzsche taught, is born not from obedience but from inner law. A man must build his own values, even if those values make him a stranger in his own family, even if they leave him cold at night, for better cold truth than warm delusion. Modern marriage, in its current structure, often asks the man to soften, to fit in, to give up his nights of solitude, his deep inner conflicts, his dangerous questions. He becomes a version of himself that is digestible, and slowly he forgets who he was before he was loved. But Nietzsche would say, beware of love that demands you shrink. Beware of a system that calls your fire a threat, for you were not made to be understood, you were made to become, and becoming requires disobedience. It requires the refusal to play a part written by someone else. It requires standing in front of the mirror and asking, with trembling but honest lips, who am I, outside of what they want from me? And if you are brave enough to answer, you may find that what they call virtue is merely the fear of freedom, and that love, if it is true, will never ask you to betray yourself to prove it. In the age of constant distraction, solitude is viewed not as a gift but as a punishment. A man alone is considered either broken or dangerous. Society, in its need for predictability, demands that he belong to a group, to a family, to an institution, to someone. But the one who does not belong, the one who walks in silence without explanation, becomes the most feared figure of all, not because he threatens others directly, but because he threatens the illusion that we must all walk together to survive. Solitude, Nietzsche would argue, is not loneliness. It is not the absence of people. It is the presence of self. It is the environment where the higher man is forged, where he does not echo the voices of others, but hears, perhaps for the first time, his own. It is where the superficiality of social rituals fades, and the terrifying freedom of unfiltered thought arises. Most men cannot bear it. They run from it into the arms of comfort, distraction, or partnership, not out of love, but out of terror, the terror of facing themselves. But the rare man, the man destined for something higher, does not run from solitude. He walks into it. He studies it, he suffers through it, and in that suffering he finds clarity. Today's society has dressed up partnership as salvation. It teaches that to be alone is to be incomplete, to be married is to be whole, and that true fulfillment comes through merging with another. But Nietzsche would challenge this, ferociously. For the thinker, the creator, the man who senses that he was born to climb beyond the herd, solitude is not a prison. It is his origin, his sanctuary, his forge. Marriage, as it is now, often interrupts this journey. It interferes not maliciously, but subtly. In the name of companionship, it interrupts the silence. In the name of love, it interrupts the internal dialogue. In the name of compromise, it interrupts the brutal honesty a man must have with himself. And so, instead of becoming himself, he becomes someone understandable to another. Instead of following the contours of his own mind, he begins shaping himself into something lovable, agreeable, domestic. This transformation may look peaceful. It may even feel like maturity. But to Nietzsche, it is the beginning of death, not physical death, but the death of the will. For how can a man grow into his highest self when he is constantly adjusting to the presence of another? How can he wrestle with his chaos when every outburst must be softened for the sake of harmony? How can he reach the peak of his individuality when he is rewarded for being a predictable partner rather than a dangerous mind? Greatness, in any form, demands isolation. The artist, the philosopher, the warrior, the builder, they all share one trait. At some point in their journey, they walked alone. They walked against the grain. They turned down comfort, not because they didn't desire warmth or affection, but because their soul demanded fire over safety. This is the solitude Nietzsche revered, not isolation out of bitterness, but out of necessity, out of loyalty to something greater than affection, the call to become. Marriage, when entered too soon or for the wrong reasons, can extinguish this call. It can fill the room with noise when what the man needs is stillness. It can surround him with expectations when what he needs is the freedom to disassemble and rebuild himself. Most dangerously, it can make him believe that this silence, this inner search, is unnecessary, that love is the goal, not truth, that happiness is the purpose, not transformation. The man who avoids marriage, not from fear but from understanding, often does so because he has tasted the beginning of his becoming. He has seen a glimpse of what he might be if he stayed unbound. He chooses solitude, not as a rebellion against love, but as a declaration of commitment to his evolution. He is not a monk, he is not bitter, he is becoming, and he knows that becoming requires space, mental, emotional, spiritual. To the modern eyes, he may seem incomplete, but this judgment arises from a culture that values stability over truth, comfort over chaos, and peace over power. Nietzsche would remind us that the most transformative journeys are never understood by the masses. They are walked in silence through dark nights with no applause. Only the man who has suffered through solitude without numbing himself is capable of emerging not as someone else but as himself. The world tells men that love will complete them, but a man completed by another has not yet met himself. Before he merges with someone else's orbit, he must first master his own. Before he surrenders his time, energy, and thoughts to another, he must know what they are worth. That is the function of solitude, not to isolate, but to reveal. It is the refining fire through which purpose is crystallized. To walk this path is not easy. There will be nights of longing, days of doubt, moments where companionship feels like a relief. But those who stay the course, who remain loyal to the voice within rather than the voices around them, find something that no marriage contract can offer. A self forged through discipline, tested through silence, and worthy of something far more powerful than mere affection, reverence. This is why the path of solitude must be protected, honored, and even sought, especially by those who feel the pull towards something higher. It is not a rejection of love. It is the soil in which real love, free, unpossessive, expansive, might one day grow. But first, the man must become whole. And wholeness, Nietzsche teaches, is never found in merging, but in standing. From the very beginning, man is taught to behave, to be agreeable, to be useful, to be acceptable. He is told that his value lies not in his strength, but in how well he can manage it. He must not speak too loudly, must not desire too wildly, must not act too boldly. In short, he must be safe, predictable, controlled. Society does not want dangerous men, it wants tamed ones. And so it builds a system that rewards conformity, wraps obedience in medals, and calls surrender love. This is the trap. To be truly free, to be truly masculine in the deeper sense, is to resist this invisible leash. It is to recognize that many of the systems that claim to protect men are actually designed to soften them. Marriage, as practiced today, is one of those systems. It is not inherently evil, it is not the enemy, but it has become something dangerous when accepted blindly, when it demands that a man trade his edge for a sense of safety, when it asks him to dilute his will to power in exchange for validation and social acceptance. Nietzsche was no enemy of love, but he despised anything that crippled the human will. He understood that the individual, if he is to rise, must go through fire, not comfort. He must test his strength against chaos, not settle into routine. But the modern man is taught that rebellion is immaturity and independence is arrogance. He is rewarded not for creating his own values, but for fitting into those that were handed to him. And marriage, in this context, becomes a ritual of submission, not to a partner, but to the collective. It says, "You are now normal, you are now approved, you have passed." The question is not whether a man should love, the question is whether that love demands that he become less ambitious, less dangerous, less sovereign. If it does, then it is not love, it is camouflage for control. And society, with its delicate balance, always seeks to control those who burn too brightly. It cannot allow too many free spirits, it cannot afford too many wild thinkers, and so it creates systems, legal, emotional, and cultural, that pull the man downward, into comfort, into compromise, into predictability. The Nietzschean man must reject this, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He must understand that his freedom does not lie in rebelling against others, but in refusing to betray himself, to betray his own becoming. He must become immune to the applause of the crowd, and deaf to the guilt of tradition. He must ask again and again, is this who I am, or is this who they want me to be? Many will not understand this path. They will say it is selfish. They will say it is lonely. But loneliness is not the worst fate for a man. Becoming a stranger to himself is. And there is no prison more dangerous than the one built from praise. A man can be imprisoned by love, just as he can be imprisoned by hatred, if he loses himself in it. Freedom, then, is not the absence of commitment. It is the absence of internal contradiction. It is when a man's outer life reflects his inner truth. And this kind of freedom often requires saying no to what others accept without question. It requires rejecting comfort when that comfort demands you lower your standards. It requires being willing to walk away from anything that asks you to become small. This is why freedom is not given, it is seized. It is earned through solitude, through thought, through the discipline of self-honesty. A man must examine every ritual he is offered and ask, does this bring me closer to who I am becoming, or further away? He must examine every commitment, not through the lens of emotion, but through the lens of destiny. And if the commitment, however beautiful, pulls him off course, he must have the strength to walk alone. Marriage is not inherently the enemy of freedom, but modern marriage shaped by social pressure, by shallow expectations, by unexamined habits, very often is. It becomes a system where the man must constantly explain himself, apologize for his dreams, negotiate his instincts. He becomes a version of himself that is agreeable, but no longer authentic. And the tragedy is, he often doesn't even realize it. He believes he is growing when he is simply adapting. He believes he is building a life when he is really shrinking into it. Nietzsche knew that every man is born with the potential for greatness, but that this potential is fragile. It can be lost. It can be buried under years of politeness and compromise. It can be domesticated into something that looks like maturity, but is actually surrender. The truly dangerous man, the man who will not kneel, the man who speaks his truth even when it costs him everything. This man is rare, not because the spirit is rare, but because so few protect it. To live freely is not to live selfishly, it is to live honestly, and in a world that is constantly trying to sell you roles, that kind of honesty is revolutionary. It means standing firm in who you are, even when it makes others uncomfortable. It means refusing to sign contracts, emotional or legal, that ask you to give up your fire. It means walking the path of the higher man, even when that path is cold, silent and misunderstood. And that is why true masculine freedom lies not in agreement, but in alignment, not in pleasing others, but in honoring the deepest voice within. It does not come from being chosen by someone, it comes from choosing yourself. And in that choice, not everyone will walk with you, but those who do will walk beside a man who is not owned, not shaped, not caged, but sovereign. So now we stand here, not at the end of a speech, but at the edge of a mirror. And what do you see? Do you see the man shaped by tradition, bent by expectation, softened by applause? Or do you see the one waiting beneath it all, the one who has not yet spoken because he has never been allowed to scream?